Funky, come. You want to come see everybody? Good afternoon. We're about ready to start our tea time story. And just a reminder, tomorrow is Saturday and we start having tea at 4. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday at 4 p.m. Then we go back to what we are now at 3. I'm going to read this chapter and maybe one more tomorrow. I'm not sure yet. Probably one more children's story tomorrow, and then I'll be doing some other things at tea time because the schedule's been changed by all this coronavirus upheaval. One of the things my friends just said is the problem is all the markers are gone. Like you go to work and on the weekends you have off. I only had one day off a week for years and years and years, for all the years I had the gallery. I worked Monday through Saturday. So I don't have that anymore, and it's not just because I'm retired, it's just that nobody has that. And we're not going to go back to any kind of regular thing anytime soon. So good to have you all with us here today, and can't wait to start chapter 5. I also want to make an announcement. The coronavirus got to my brain. I don't have it, but it's affecting my mind. And I read chapter 13 of The Horse and His Boy, and I will be doing chapter 12 tonight. It's a little before the fact. Last night was so exciting I could hardly stand it. But I will do chapter 12 if I haven't read it. I'm going to double check it in a little bit before I broadcast. So today we're on chapter 5, and where we left off yesterday, the Little Lame Prince. If you remember, I arrived in a traveling cloak. Little Prince had this godmother, this wonderful godmother that was magically appeared and was really loving, the only really loving person in his life. And having been spent a lot of time in an orphanage when I was young, between 1 and 2, I identify with having somebody that would love and had kind eyes, because there weren't many around. And so as we left it yesterday, I'm going to read just a little bit, because he put the traveling cloak in his toy chest cupboard, and the nurse, who was not that friendly but okay and fed him, decided to clean out the cupboard when he wasn't looking, and he thought she had thrown out the traveling cloak, and he was crushed because the kind of godmother came back, and I'll tell you how she came back, and then we'll go on to chapter 5. He was the nurse made him cry, and she only laughed at him as he felt she would laugh now. So he was really sad. And it's all my own fault, he cried. I ought to have taken better care of my godmother's gift. Oh, godmother, forgive me. I'll never be so careless again. I don't know what the cloak is exactly, but I'm sure it's something precious. Help me to find it again. A little bit like a prayer. Oh, don't let it be stolen from me. Don't, please. Have you ever been that way where you felt it's lost or something's been taken? And you feel just incomplete and robbed? Ha, 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 laughed a silvery voice. Why, that traveling cloak is the one thing in the world which nobody can steal. It is of no use to anybody except the owner. Open your eyes, my prince, and see what you shall see. His dear godmother, he thought, and turned eagerly around because it was behind his back. But no, he only beheld lying in a corner of the room, all dust and cobwebs, his precious traveling cloak. Prince Dolar darted toward it, tumbling several times on the way. Remember, he can't walk, as he often did tumble, poor boy, and pick himself up again, never complaining. Snatching it to his breast, he hugged it and kissed it, cobwebs and all, as if it had been something alive. Then he began to unroll it, wondering each minute what would happen. And as the last chapter closed, what did happen was so curious that I must leave it for the next chapter. And that's this chapter, so here we go. If any reader, big or little, should wonder whether there is meaning in this story deeper than that of an ordinary fairy tale, I will own that there is, that I have hidden it so carefully that the smaller people and many larger folk will never find it out. And meantime, the book may be read straight on, like Cinderella or Bluebeard or Hopo, whatever that is. Oh, Hoppo, my thumb, Tom Thumb. For what interest it has or what amusement it may bring. Having said this, I return to Prince Dolor, that little lame boy who many may think so exceedingly to be pitied. But if you had seen him as he sat patiently untying his wonderful cloak, which was done up in a very tight and perplexing parcel, using skillfully his deft little hands, and knitting his brows with firm determination, while his eyes glistened with pleasure and energy and eager anticipation, if you had beheld him thus, you might have changed your opinion. I remember when my girls were little, like when you'd open a birthday present, Rachel would love to open presents for Abigail when she had a party, because hers was before her, Rachel's, and there's nothing like Christmas morning or a birthday surprise where you open it and you say, oh, it's just what I wanted. We'll go on. When we see people suffering or unfortunate, we feel very sorry for them. But when we see them bravely bearing their sufferings and making the best of their misfortunes, it is quite a different feeling. We respect and we admire them. One can respect and admire even a little child. When Prince Dolor had patiently untied all the knots, a remarkable thing happened. The cloak began to undo itself. Slowly unfolding, it laid itself down on the carpet as flat as if it had been ironed. The split, it was like a poncho with a split with a hood. The split joined with a little sharp crick-crack, and the rim turned up all round till it was breast high. For meantime, the cloak had grown and became quite large enough for one person to sit in it, as comfortable as if it were a boat. The prince watched it rather anxiously. It was such an extraordinary, not to say a frightening thing. Wouldn't you be scared? I would be. However, he was no coward, but a thorough boy, who, if he had been like other boys, would doubtless have grown up daring and adventurous. A soldier, a sailor, and the like. As it was, he could only show his courage morally, not physically, by being afraid of nothing, and by doing boldly all that it was in his narrow powers to do. And I am not sure but that in this way he showed more real valor than if he had 6 pairs of proper legs. He said to himself, "What a goose I am, as if my dear godmother would ever have given me anything to hurt me. Here goes." So with one of his active leaps, he sprang right into the middle of the cloak, where he squatted down, wrapping his arms tight around his knees, for they shook a little, and his heart beat fast. But there he sat, steady and silent, waiting for what might happen next. Nothing did happen. He began to think nothing would, and to feel rather disappointed, when he recollected the words he'd been told to repeat. Abracadabra, doom, doom, doom. Or dum, 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 but it's doom. He repeated them, laughing all the while. They seemed such nonsense. And then... Now, I don't expect anybody to believe what I'm going to relate, though a good many wise people have believed a good many sillier things. And as seeing is believing, and I never saw it, I cannot be expected implicitly to believe it myself, except in sort of a way. And yet there is truth in it for some people. The cloak rose slowly and steadily, at a few inches, then gradually higher and higher, till it nearly touched the skylight. Prince Dolor's head actually bumped against the glass, or would have done so had he not crouched down, crying, "Oh, please don't hurt me," in a most melancholy voice. Then he suddenly remembered his godmother's express command, "Open the skylight." Gaining his courage at once without a moment's delay, he lifted up his head and began searching for the bolt. The cloak, meanwhile, remaining perfectly still, balanced in the air. A little bit like the story of the magic carpet. But the minute the window was opened, out it sailed, right out into the clear, fresh air, with nothing between it and the cloudless blue. Fun. Yeah, Punky, you want to come? Prince Dolor had never felt any such delicious sensation before. I can understand it, cannot you? Do you ever think in watching the rook coming home singly or in pairs, pouring their way across the calm evening sky till they vanish, like black dots in the misty gray? That's birds we're talking about. How pleasant it must feel to be up there, quite out of the noise and din of this world, able to hear and see everything down below, yet troubled by nothing and teased by no one. All alone, but perfectly content. Sounds good, doesn't it? Something like this was the happiness of the little prince when he got out of the hopeless tower and found himself for the first time in the pure open air, the sky above him and the earth below. True, there was nothing but earth and sky, no houses, no trees, no rivers, mountains, seas, not a beast on the ground or a bird in the air. But to him, even the level plain looked beautiful. And then there was a glorious arch of the sky with a little young moon sitting in the west like a baby queen. And the evening breeze was so sweet and fresh, it kissed him like his godmother's kisses. And by a few stars came out, first 2 or 3, then quantities, so that when he began to count them, he was utterly bewildered. By this time, however, the cool breeze had become cold. The mist gathered, and as he had, as he said, no outdoor clothes, poor Prince Dolor was not very comfortable. The dews fell damp on his curls. He began to shiver. Perhaps I'd better go home, thought he, but how? For in his excitement, the other words which his godmother had told him to use had slipped his memory. They were only a little different from the first, but in that slight difference all the importance lay. As he repeated his abracadabra, trying ever so many other syllables after it, cloak only went faster and faster, skimming on through the dusky, empty air. Wow. The poor little prince began to feel frightened. What if this wonderful traveling cloak should keep on thus traveling, perhaps to the world's end, carrying with it a poor, tired, hungry boy, who after all was beginning to think there was something very pleasant in supper and bed. Dear godmother, he cried pitifully, do help me. Tell me this once. I'll never forget again. Instantly the words came rushing into his head. Abracadabra, tum, tum, tea. Is that it? Ah, yes, for the cloak began to turn slowly. He repeated the charm again. Abracadabra, tum, tum, tea. More distinctly and firmly, when it gave a little dip like a nod of satisfaction and immediately started back as fast as ever in the direction of the tower. How about that? He reached the skylight, which he found exactly as he had left it, and slipped in, cloak and all, as easily as he got out. He had scarcely reached the floor and was still sitting in the middle of his traveling cloak, like a frog on a water lily leaf, as his godmother had expressed it, when he heard his nurse's voice outside. Oh, bless us, what has become of your Royal Highness all this time? To sit stupidly here at the window till it's quite dark and leave the skylight open to you? Prince, what can you be thinking of? You're the silliest boy I ever knew. Am I? Said he absently, never heeding her crossness, for his own anxiety was lest she might find out anything. She would have been a very clever person to have done so. The instant Prince Dolor got off it, the cloak folded itself up in the tiniest possible parcel, tied all its own knots, and rolled itself of its own accord into the farthest, darkest corner of the room. If the nurse had seen it, which she didn't, she would have taken it as a mere bundle of rubbish, not worth noticing. Shutting the skylight with an angry bang, boom, she brought in the supper and lit the candles with her usual unhappy expression of countenance. But Prince Dolor hardly saw it. He only saw it hid in the corner where nobody would see it, his wonderful traveling cloak. And though this supper was not particularly nice, he ate it heartily, scarcely hearing a word of his nurse's grumbling, which tonight seemed to have taken place of her sullen silence. Poor woman, he thought when he paused a minute to listen. Look at her with those quiet, happy eyes, so like his mother's. Poor woman, she hasn't got a traveling cloak. And when he was left alone at last, crept into his little bed, and he lay awake a good while watching when he called his sky garden all planted with stars like flowers. His chief thought was, I must be up very early tomorrow morning and get my lessons done. Then I'll go traveling all over the world in my beautiful cloak. So next day he opened his eyes with the sun and went with a good heart to his lessons. They had hitherto been the chief amusement of his dull life. Now I'm afraid he found them also a little dull. But he tried to be good. I don't say Prince Dolor always was good, but he generally tried to be. And when his mind went wandering after the dark, dusty corner where lay his precious treasure, he resolutely called it back again. For he said, how ashamed my godmother would be of me if I grew up a stupid boy. But the instant lessons were done and he was alone in the empty room, he crept across the floor, undid the shabby little bundle. His fingers, trembling with eagerness, climbed on the chair and thence to the table, and so as to unbar the skylight. He forgot nothing now, said his magic charm, and was away out of the window, as children say, in a few minutes less than no time. Nobody missed him. He was accustomed to sitting quietly always with that. His nurse, though only in the next room, perceived no difference. And besides, she might have gone in and out a dozen times, and it would have been just the same. She never could have found out his absence. But what do you think the clever grandmother did? She took a quantity of moonshine or some equally convenient material and made an image which she set on the windowsill reading, or by the table drawing, where it looked so like Prince Dolor that any common observer would ever have guessed the deception. And even the boy would have been puzzled to know which was the image and which was himself. She wanted to hide the fact that she was lazy. All this while, the happy little fellow was away, floating in the air on his magic cloak and seeing all sorts of wonderful things. They seemed wonderful to him, who had hitherto seen nothing at all. First, there were the flowers that grew on the plain, which, whenever the cloak came near, he strained his eyes to look at it. They were very tiny, but very beautiful. White saxifrage, and yellow lotus, and ground thistles, purple and bright, with many others, the names of which I do not know. No more did Prince Dolor, though he tried to find them out by recalling. No more did Prince Dolor, though he tried to find them out by recalling any pictures he had seen of them. But he was too far off, and though it was pleasant enough to admire them as brilliant patches of color, he still would have liked to examine them all. He was, as a little girl I once knew said of a playfellow, a very examining boy. I wonder, he thought, whether I could see better through a pair of glasses, like those my nurse reads with, and take such care of. How would I take care of them too if I only had a pair? Immediately he felt something queer and hard fixing itself to the bridge of his nose. It was a pair of the prettiest gold spectacles he'd ever seen. Looking downward, he found that, though ever so high above the ground, he could see every minute blade of grass, every tiny bud and flower, nay, even the insects that walked over them. Thank you, he cried in a gush of gratitude to anybody or everybody, but especially to his dear godmother, whom he felt sure had given him the sweet present. I'm going to have a drink of tea. As you kids and everybody remember, this is a mustache cup from the period. It keeps the mustache free of being stained by the tea or coffee. And it has a deep bowl, so if it's too hot, you can pour it in there and drink it out of the saucer, but it's better to have your mustache protected. Let's go on. Then, just to rest his eyes, he turned them up to the sky. The blue, bright, empty sky which he had looked at so often and seen nothing. Now surely there was something, a long black wavy line moving on in the distance, not by chance as the clouds move apparently, but deliberately as if it were alive. He might have seen it before. He almost thought he had, but then he could not tell what it was. Looking at it through his spectacles, he discovered that it was really alive, being a long string of birds flying one after the other, their wings moving steadily and their heads pointed in one direction, as steadily as if each were a little ship, guided invisibly by an unerring helm. They must be the passage birds flying seaward, cried the boy, who had read a little about them and had a great talent for putting two and two together and finding out all he could. Oh, how I should like to see them quite close and to know where they come from and whither they are going. How I wish I knew everything in all the world. A silly speech for even an examining, quote-unquote, little boy to make. Because as we grow older, the more we know, the more we find out there is to know. And Prince Stoller blushed when he had said it and hoped nobody had heard him. Apparently somebody had, however, for the cloak gave a sudden bound forward, and presently he found himself high up in the air in the very middle of that band of aerial travelers who made no magic cloak to travel on, except their wings. Yet there they were, making their fearless way through the sky. Prince Stoller looked at them as one after another. One after the other they glided past him. They looked at him, those pretty swallows, with their changing necks and bright eyes, as if wondering to meet in mid-air such an extraordinary sort of bird. Oh, I wish I were going with you, you lovely creatures, cried the boy. I'm getting so tired of this dull plain and the dreary and lonely tower. I do want to see the world. Pretty swallows, dear swallows, tell me what it looks like, the beautiful, wondering world. But the swallows flew past him, steadily, pursuing their courses as if inside each little head had been the mariner's compass to guide them safe over land and sea, direct to the place where they had desired to go. The boy looked after them with envy. For a long time he followed his eyes the faint, wavy black line as it floated away. Sometimes changing, it curves a little, but never deviating from its settled course, till it vanished entirely out of sight. Then he settled himself down in the center of the cloak, feeling quite sad and lonely. I think I'll go home, he said, repeated his abracadabra, tum tum tea, with a rather heavy heart. The more he had, the more he wanted. And it is not always one can have everything one wants, at least at the exact minute one craves for it, even though one is a prince and has a powerful and beneficent godmother. He did not like to vex her by calling for her and telling her how unhappy he was. In spite of all her goodness, so that he just kept his trouble to himself, went back to his lonely tower and spent 3 days in silent melancholy. We call that being depressed today. Without even attempting another journey on his traveling cloak. Well, he sounds really discouraged. I'm so sorry to hear that. Next time we'll be reading chapter 6, and it's really interesting what happens in a few days, even though he's very depressed and locked in a room. So a couple of things. Don't you feel the way we are right now, like our house is kind of like a closed up tower? Even if we have love in it, we're trapped in this huge tower and we can't go out. Boys and girls, wouldn't it be nice to have one of these magic cloaks you could just wrap yourself in and fly out the window and fly up and see the birds and fly with the birds? You know, they were talking about the swallows. Well, when I was little, we used to always go to San Juan Capistrano, which is a mission in Southern California. It's near San Diego. And every year, the swallows return. And there's a very schmaltzy 1920s song about the swallows returning to Capistrano. I think it's called The Bells of St. Mary. Anyway, they would come every year, and it was a big spectacle. And I just remember all the birds. There were lots of birds, and of course, lots of bird food. But they are really beautiful birds, and they fly very fast, and they're just magical in the way they look. So I hope that you boys and girls and mom and dads and whoever you are, wherever you are inside, you get outside and take a look at the birds. There are a lot more birds out and about because there's a lot less noise and pollution. And it's really wonderful in the morning to hear the birds singing. There's one that seems like he keeps singing to me at the window. Yesterday, I believe I wore what would be the equivalent of the traveling cloak, and it's a fashion that probably hasn't changed much from the time of the Little Prince. Little Lame Prince. So this is a cloak, and a cloak sometimes would have sleeves, but it would be sleeves underneath a cape. This is a cape. There are no sleeves. There's just an armhole here, and a traveling cloak sometimes would have a sleeve underneath there, but the cloak part of it is the part that keeps you warm. It's like wrapping yourself in a wonderful blanket. This is from Austria, and it's Loden wool, which is just wonderful. You can rain and it can do anything. This was made in Munich, München. So this is what I wore coming in last night, and as you remember, I had a lantern. You'd have to have a lantern at night when this was written, and I showed you that. So I'm just glad to have you all with me, and tomorrow we're going to go to the next story. And I want to leave you with this. I've repeated this, but I'm going to repeat it again. The way we have seen this is a portrait of my daughter Rachel by Marguerite Slocum Quinn when she was 16. She really got her likeness, and she also got who she is as an adult. She's living in Brooklyn right now, in a studio with 12 artists who were trapped after the coronavirus. And it's been a really stressful time for them. She said the other day that 3 refrigerated body trucks came by. This was like a week or 2 ago. And it was really traumatic, and one parked across the street. It was refrigerated to take the bodies to be cremated. So this is Rachel when she was 16. I just kept looking at this. This is an old mirror frame, and this really talented artist, Marguerite Quinn, who's a friend of Rachel's, did this sketch of her, which is one of her best. She liked to paint like Van Gogh. She was an impressionist, and some of her best paintings that have this unfinished look. And that's kind of how God sees us in this present crisis. This is the picture we see of ourselves. This is our beautiful little life. This is the way we thought the normal was and our busyness was before we had this happen. Somebody talked about their busyness before the busyness comes back, and I said, well, now wait a minute. If you want to love your children, I think after being locked up like this, you realize that busyness is something you volunteer for. What we call normal life, which is a complete picture, whether it's cushioned with money or private community or faith or whatever, this is how we see ourselves, as being somewhat perfect in our own little precious life. When in fact, we were talking today about toilet paper, people running out of toilet paper. And my response was, well, yeah, that's true, but there have been thousands of years without toilet paper, and there are bushes, and we can dig a hole, we can do a lot of other things. So we have first world problems compared to the rest of the world, and they're dying everywhere. So this is This is how we see our perfect little life, which is the way we've operated when, like I've said again, the normal, never use the word normal again, or new normal, that's out the window, and busyness. Those are the 4 words you just cannot use, 3 words. So this is the way our lives should be, and this is one of the chances we have to do that. This is the someday when I have time, I'll do this day. Someday I'll be this if I have time. Someday I'll read this book. I have this wonderful library, but I'm too busy right now. So busy, normal, new normal, all go out the window. And someday becomes now. So I hope that the rest of your day is spent being now. Like last night after my reading, I sat and enjoyed the fire till about 11 o'clock. It was such a beautiful night. I could walk out on Route 50. It was like a towpath in England. There were no cars anywhere, and the sky was beautiful. And I thought, this is my someday. I can only have now. That is what God gives us. And this is what we need to do with now. Not try to impose this back on our now that will never be again. No matter if we even get a cure and we're back at work, even in 2 weeks, a month, 6 months, I think this can be a long time. It could be a year before we're really out of it. And even so, our paradigms have all shifted during this time, and we realize what's really important. Like I find things that I've lost. I find things that I can make do, change. I don't have to always go run out and find something. So I challenge you today, parents and kids, to find things you haven't seen or enjoy something that you've had and you think is precious but never really took time to read or to just observe. Later this week I'll be going back to curating during tea time, probably Saturday if not Sunday. That's tomorrow at 4 and Monday at 4. And then we'll start reading again on Tuesday at 3 and on the rest of the week for this hour of tea time. And every night, tonight and on 7 o'clock, we'll be continuing to read The Horse and His Boy. So thank you all for coming, and just remember this. This is the way our life is to be from now on. Thank you for helping me be part of it. Love you all, and look forward to seeing you and hearing from you. Thanks so much for tuning in, and you can find this on YouTube. It'll be posted on YouTube and is posted immediately on my Facebook Live page. So you can see this anytime. If you're busy and can't have tea because you're cleaning your room, you can come back and do it to reward yourself. Love you all. See you soon. Bye-bye.